Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Marie-Ève Cabana, and we have with us today Ben Bjorgi, Director of Clinical Monitoring Services at Alta Sciences. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Today, we'll be discussing with Ben clinical monitoring services and what this means with their sponsors. So to begin, Ben, why don't you give us a little information about yourself?
Sure. So as Marie-Ève mentioned, I'm Ben Bjorgi. I'm the Director of the Monitoring Service Department. I've been in the industry for a little over 23 years. I spent my first 13 years managing studies from the clinic side. And then from there, I transitioned to the CRA world, where I spent 7 years as a monitor working with both small and large CROs, as well as directly with sponsors. I've monitored phase 1 through 3 trials over that 7-year span. Then in 2018, I joined Alta Sciences as the Director of our clinical operations. And this past year, I've transitioned to the, now what I'm currently at is that Director of the Monitoring Services Department.
Great. And would you be able to tell us a little bit about clinical monitoring?
So yeah, I mean, ICH, GCP, they kind of define monitoring as that act of overseeing the conduct of a clinical trial. That's ensuring the trial is conducted according to protocol, GCP, SOP, and regulatory requirements. Monitoring is sometimes one of those overlooked aspects of a clinical trial. However, it's a very important cog in the process, and sponsors are responsible for ensuring their proper monitoring of their investigational trial. And then I go back to that importance aspect is because, monitoring is a quality control measure that's put in place. It ensures the rights and well-being of the subjects are protected, that the reported trial data is accurate, complete, and verifiable among your source docs. And then also the conduct of the trial is in compliance with the protocol, GCP, and applicable regulatory requirements. So basically, as monitors, we're the eyes and ears of the sponsor during their trial.
So would you be able to tell us a little bit about our clinical monitoring services?
Yeah, so for those, kind of familiar with monitoring, we work in that same context as most of the monitoring services out there. With that being said, we have a department of experienced full-time CRAs, and they're all strategically located within a close distance of both our Montreal and our Kansas City site. We have a fully integrated program with SOPs and monitoring templates. The scope of services we provide, and they're pretty standard to the industry, where we perform pre-study qualification visits, site initiation visits, which include, creating the SIV slides. We'll do pre-dose eligibility and dose observation visits. And then also those routine IMVs or interim monitoring visits. And that's where we perform like ISF, TMF review, IP accountability, and then of course the SDV or source doc verification, whether it be risk-based or 100% SDV. And of course we do the closeout visits also, which are usually done once the database hard locks occur. And then, with our monitoring, a big part of our startup procedures, when a study is awarded, that entails working with the client on exactly what their needs and expectations are, and implementing those into the clinical monitoring plan, which is basically our blueprint of how we will monitor a study. And then one last thing that to mention, that we are capable of doing standalone monitoring.
So not only applied with a full service study, we can also do it as standalone.
We're capable of taking on trials that for example, if a sponsor comes in with a molecule, at the early phases, even be it preclinical, and it comes through our phase 1 unit, if they plan on moving to the phase 2A realm, we can easily take our monitoring services and follow along with that study.
That's great. And there is one question that we get asked a lot is there a conflict of interest monitoring trials run by your own clinic?
This is one of the mindsets out there, the monitoring a study run by your own CRO, that can create a conflict of interest. And, some clients get a little bit nervous about that, but, there really is acceptance by both FDA and MHRA. Most all of the regulatory bodies out there with a CRO actually monitor their own studies. In fact, the FDA, it's not considered a conflict of interest, based on them for the same CRO to oversee both study conduct and monitoring. The conflict of interest can always arise, but that's at the chain of command with either the sponsor or the CRO is set up incorrectly. And that's one of the key things that, we took into account when we set up our monitoring service is that reporting structure. So the way our group is set up according to our org chart, it's at the top of our org chart, of course, is our CEO, Chris Perkin. And then from there, it goes to our VP of Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, which is David Gregoire. And he happens to be our boss, mine and the CRAs. And he reports into Chris Perkin, and then of course we report into David. So, as you can see there's no crossing lines with the clinic as you look down our org chart. And then, when we go into the clinic, we're following the same procedures and guidelines the clinic would use for an external monitor coming into the site. So, we try to keep that separation of clinic and monitoring group all the way through.
That's good. So really, really trying to avoid any conflict of interest.
Yep.
And what would be the benefit of using your internal monitoring group?
There's actually, quite a few. And I think one of the top reasons would be, well, there's many reasons, but, it allows for a full service experience for the client. The client can get all the services in one contract rather than reaching out to a third-party vendor for monitoring. You just get it all in one package type deal. That's always a benefit. And again, like I mentioned before, all our monitors, they are in close proximity to the respective site. And of course, that's going to save the client on the travel expenses. So that's a benefit right there. That's cost benefit. And then, as internal employees, we have access to our internal systems. No training is required for each of the different studies we would have to monitor. Whereas, any kind of, systems that, we use that an outside monitor have to come in, that's additional training time that has to be applied. Whereas, once we're trained on our own internal systems, we're good to go. And then, another thing too is, as internal employees, they all know the lay of the land, where they can hit the ground running, and they have quick and easy access to the documents and, most importantly, the personnel. They know who to contact. They know where to get things, which is an advantage a third party would not have. It just kind of adds that, kind of gives a quicker response time to client questions. And then, of course, we as employees, we have access to our full SOPs. So that kind of helps us during the monitoring of studies to ensure that there's proper execution of all the study procedures that are being performed. And then I do have to go back to, the experience aspect. Our CRAs, they average well over 5 years of monitoring, auditing experience in phase 1 through 4 trials, with that really emphasis on that phase 1 trials. And I think, especially during this time of COVID and, where most monitoring has gone to that remote route, our CRAs can be on site. I think that's a major benefit. Being employees of Alta Sciences, we follow our company COVID response plan, and that allows us to go to the clinic so that, the client basically will have boots on the ground, throughout their entire study, whereas third party is still in that remote phase where, you're getting data sent and you don't really have someone with their eyes and ears on the site. So I think that's, at this time, that's a great benefit to have.
Right. And I mean, with travel, so, traveling right now, it's unknown.
Exactly. And plus it's a hit and miss. I mean, even if sites are starting to open up, it's that, can you get to the site, from some of these airports? Yeah.
Well, that's good. And I know that companies are trying to limit as well, visitors and who is entering the site. So if you're a current employee of Alta Sciences as a CRA, then it's much easier.
Correct. Yeah, because we'll follow, we follow that same testing and protection PPE rules that the clinic staff and every other site member that comes into work on a daily basis follow. So that gives us that access to be able to enter the clinic and actually monitor on site.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Ben. This concludes our interview for today. Thank you for your time.
You bet. I appreciate the time and allowing me to speak about our monitoring services. And if anybody does have any questions or would like to know more about our monitoring services, you can certainly contact me at any time.
And we'll provide your contact information. So if there are any questions, they can contact you directly.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.